If you're willing, I'm willing. The last 2 days never happened.
What do you mean?
I mean, we'll go on as before.
Well, that's the most improper thing I ever heard.
What?
I can hardly believe my ears.
What are you so shocked about?
I didn't think you were capable of it.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. So today I'm joined by Richard Lamondin, who is the co-founder and CEO of EcoSystems, a water and energy conservation company. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you, Scott. Great to be here.
All right, so I know your brother wasn't able to join today, but my understanding is that you run this company together as co-founders and co-CEOs. So curious to know a little bit more about that.
Sure, yeah. So my brother and I were very close. We're 2 years apart in age. We've grown up together and done everything together our whole lives. While I think there's always a big question mark around working with family, for us, there never really seemed to be any other option when we were thinking about this. We both grew up in South Florida. As you know, it's a very watery place. And so from a young age, we've always been really attracted to the environment together, and we've always wanted to work together. And so in 2012, when we said, hey, let's try to start a business around supporting the environment and fighting the climate crisis, I couldn't find a person more aligned.
Well, I think you're very fortunate to not only have a sibling that you really appreciate and respect, but be in a position to actually work together and actually be complementary. Now, my understanding also is that both of you have come from a real estate background, so I'd be curious to understand how that eventually transitioned to what you're doing and what you saw during your work there that helped you to understand the potential market opportunity.
Sure. So growing up, our dad worked his way up from a broker to a real estate developer. And so from a very young age, we were hearing a lot about budgets and, operating expenses of different buildings. And so when we were looking to get involved in a way to really help the environment, we had done ourselves some work in sort of real estate brokerage to try to make some money when we were teenagers. And what that gave us access to was a bunch of budgets for condominiums and different rental communities. And so when we were trying to determine, where are the problems, we looked at the high level. High level was EPA saying that U.S. homes waste 1 trillion gallons of water every year, that 20% of all toilets in the U.S. are currently leaking. But those are very large statistics, but, where are the toilets? Where are those leaks actually occurring? They're occurring in homes and apartment buildings when you're thinking at scale. And so we started to assess a lot of these properties and saw what appeared to be quite high water bills for what we knew at the time. And we were fortunate enough, because of our background, to gain access to some of these communities and apartments to actually get in there and assess and see what was happening on the ground. And we realized that while at the time in 2012, this is before California's drought, this is before, a lot of the more recent events have come to put this more on the radar, we realized that most folks were thinking at a very high level, but no one was thinking about so much rolling up their sleeves and getting down in the muck, so to speak. And so we saw an opportunity at the time to do a little bit more than be consultants, to actually seek out, particularly on older buildings, and go in there. Particularly in our first iteration, we would actually just calibrate toilet tanks and do very basic things, change flappers and different and kill leaks within these different fixtures, and we were saving 25-30% on bills. And so we basically took that early concept, to be quite frank, learned most of my plumbing skills on YouTube, and took it from there to now working in well over 100,000 apartments and homes nationwide.
Yeah, it's really interesting because not only because you're in the real estate brokerage business, but I'm sure out of necessity, even managing your family's portfolio real estate. These are top of mind things. And I think one of the things that I took away is that many people tend to look at it kind of superficially at a big macro perspective, but they're not really getting down to granularity and the details. And to your point, it's the flappers, it's the configuration, it's those small little changes that makes a big difference. Let's talk a little bit about EcoSystem. What exactly is it, and how are you guys helping to conserve and save water and energy?
And just on your last point, you're absolutely right. And it's also not as sexy sometimes to get granular, and I think that scares folks away as well. But so we are a water and energy conservation company centered around a mission to prove that conservation is good for business. To really make an impact, you need all sectors of society to be working and pulling the same oar. And we found, in general, the business community wasn't necessarily buying in. And so what we do is we design and implement programs that have both financial impacts for our customers, positive financial impacts, and also positive impact for the environment. What does that mean? Well, we started as a water conservation company, and from those early toilet days, as we discussed, we attract the attention, to keep a long story short, of a number of large private equity-backed, multifamily real estate portfolios where we do most of our work, and they've rolled us out nationwide on a lot of their projects, doing things at large scale, like bringing everything up to 21st century efficiency standards, whether if it's replacing shower heads, smart thermostat controls, upgrading sinks, toilets. I mean, you name it within a property. If it uses water and it's wasteful, we're upgrading it. And it's very blue collar in nature in how we approach this, but we've been one of the few that's been able to really implement it at scale. In the past year or so, we were getting requests to really incorporate energy conservation into our offerings. And so we acquired an LED lighting company from Denver, and for about the past year and a half, we've also incorporated a lot of energy conservation programs into our services to really, for the multifamily communities, provide a really broad-based and holistic approach to this. The results are most of the time anywhere between 25 and 40% reduction on utility costs and usage based on these programs. And so not only are you saving, you're reducing CO2 emissions by, thousands of metric tons per property, you are reducing millions of gallons of fresh water, you're also saving them millions of dollars in utility costs a year, not only for the ownership, but also for the tenants. And so basically winners all around.
Yeah, one of the things that I think I want to just kind of real briefly explore is that when we're talking about the profile of a property owner, multi-tenant property owner, they're probably one of the toughest from a fiscal perspective to release actual funds for new improvements. So positioning and making sure that the messaging resonates so that what you spend in terms of new fixtures and whatnot still actually results in savings because of savings from the water, savings from the energy. But I'm not surprised at all that really the real traction came from the PE and the REITs, because they are looking at the big numbers, whereas I think the property managers or the property owners are thinking in terms of really minimizing cash outflow. So I'm wondering, how did you kind of bridge those conversations with the PE so that they could really see that this could scale, especially given the fact that a lot of the work you do seems like it's more improvement and renovation oriented?
So that was an evolution. We didn't come into this business knowing how to speak that language. And quite honestly, I do have to code switch from time to time between our customers and when I focus more publicly, because our customers, for obvious reasons, are very numbers driven. So over time, what we discovered was that we just trial and errored what resonated with our customers, and when we were going out and selling, we're a totally bootstrap company, and so we've had to eat what we kill, so to speak, our whole existence. And what really it came down to was both an environmental shift. So we spent a lot of years being very small. We really didn't start scaling heavily until 2017. Not coincidentally, that was when ESG really started to enter the lexicon of a lot of these companies. And so what we were able to do is, it's very easy to demonstrate our impact. You have utilities measuring your energy usage and your water usage. So we take the before and the after, we quantify that. We can also quantify impact on their residents in other ways in terms of reducing their costs. And we provide those reports and we let them do as they will. And most of the time, since let's say 2016, 2017, we haven't had to educate too much. It's been more them pulling the data out of us than the other way around. While beforehand, I would say from about 2012 to 2016, we did a lot of educating in the sale. And I don't know, maybe it's just that the numbers speak for themselves. Maybe it's the fact that the financial returns are so good. And at a time when the multifamily industry has been one of the best industries from an investment perspective to be in, where we're increasing their net operating incomes in addition to everything else we're doing. There was a point around that time where it felt like we went from pushing the rock uphill to everything feeling downhill. And I can't pinpoint exactly what or how that was, but even the management companies caught on once the ownership groups did. And I just think it has to do with the fact that eventually mind shifted after a long period of time.
Well, that is really promising and very uplifting to hear, especially on this podcast channel, because so much of what we do is actually that, before we can get down to impact accounting, before we can get it down into impact getting integrated into supply chain and manufacturing and the actual detail of the business, we really have to change the narrative. And I feel that to your point, whether it's the UN SDGs or just general sustainability movements, the narrative, the storytelling is starting to really catch on fire. And I think all of us have, in one way or another, have witnessed, these impacts, whether it's, potential Central Florida disappearing because of water rise, or wildfires, or rise in temperatures. All of us in some way have experienced that. So I think it's becoming more real than abstract as before. So I'm very glad to hear that. Let's transition to talk a little bit about, in addition to the core replacement and calibration and configuration, how are you using IoT and new information, real-time information, to be able to actually help further optimize and monitor these large multi-unit assets?
That's a great question. So that's actually been the next phase of our company. At first, we had a proof concept, proof savings, and our demand was strong enough to keep us sustained. We are now seeing a lot of entrants into the market of different monitoring technologies, different leak detection technologies, and so that are much more granular than, let's say, what a utility can give. And actually right now we recently finally picked a winner on our side for the monitoring technologies that we want to go ahead and push to our customers. You're also seeing now, I think, a lot more preventative maintenance work. So for example, these leak detection technologies are also tied into automatic shutoff valves for the building to help kill a leak. I'm finding, though, that it really depends who you're talking to, where the interest is. Most of our customer base is, in the industry parlance, like Class B, C, and D type ownership and management groups. They own and manage more workforce housing developments, which you alluded to before. Budgets are fairly tight. And so it's actually been a challenge for us now to convince them that this is the next step. The multifamily industry is a little bit behind the times when you look at some of the other industries like commercial or even hospitality. And there's a lot of buzzwords to talk about data and, analytics and things, but you don't really see that actually resonating when it comes time to put the money where the mouth is. But that is, I think, an important next step in the process. But the problem I think even the IoT companies face is being able to explain to the person who is not so well versed on the utilities and usage and consumption what they're seeing. And that's something that we have found that we have a potential niche for, is that we've monitored and tested a number of technologies, but most of them just give you a dashboard, looks pretty. It doesn't really put much into context. And I think that's the step that we find ourselves thinking about. How do we help large groups put what they're seeing into context? I haven't seen anyone do that at scale technologically.
So very interesting on a number of fronts. One is, part of the reason that you're in a very enviable position is that you have access. You've built these relationships. You have large footprints. And that's valuable in itself. And of course, this group that you're talking about, although diverse as they are, at the end of the day, they have a very tight purse string. So any type of new capital expenditures, they're just really risk averse to that. And I think your group really understands and appreciates how to present that information in this context that most smart building and IoT startups really don't get, or at least from their point of view, they think it's obvious, right? Hey, look, here's a dashboard. It shows you the savings isn't that good enough, right? So there's an interesting play here of you guys being an intermediary to a lot of these new tech and being able to actually create a new revenue stream out of that, in addition to what you guys already do.
Absolutely. And that's an area we've always been consultants, but up until now, we've used that as a way to get to where we actually earned our money, which was on the installation. And now we're finding that we're getting a lot of demand to utilize that expertise that we've gained. And I think also because we have sort of that white collar, blue collar bridge, and that we're vertical and doing both of them, we by nature are always trying to think about how a group's going to think about this in a practical way. Now, how to package that, Scott, maybe I have to call you after this to help figure out how to actually build that. But there's a lot of other areas that we haven't touched. And again, I think for whatever reason, our expertise, our niche, whatever you want to call it, is definitely in understanding the granular levels of why. First step is like we said, we figured out the consumption of why. Next step is, I can tell you a lot of these groups understaff their maintenance, and they are not doing the preventative work that extends the life of their fixtures, that thereby enables those. Then they're replacing, let's just say AC units, right? If you're not changing your filter on your AC unit, like the most basic thing you can do on an AC, that's going to die quicker. But most groups up until now haven't cared because they're flipping properties every few years. But the market has changed. So now that it's changed, what happens next? It's longer term holding of these assets, have to take care of them. But if you're replacing these fixtures more and more often, it's more emissions to actually produce more items. And so what we're looking at on top of that is understanding how can we support, either through devices that monitor the health of these fixtures, or just by developing programs to do preventive maintenance, how can we support at all the problems we're seeing on a granular level? And you touched on it perfectly. And a lot of groups are developing solutions before they find the problems we're seeing. But I think that a lot of these tech companies that are doing great work, identifying, I think, more deeply what the true problem is, would benefit us in terms of the groups on the ground to really better sell those services to customers.
Well, just to kind of bring the conversation to kind of a recap and a summary, is that as I'm listening, I think the narrative for this conversation has been around the value of granularity, the whys, and really it's in the details. So, when we think about climate change, when we think about the rise in sea levels, and the kinds of things that we have to do on a large scale to make a positive impact in terms of risk mitigation and adaptation, it's really the details. And I think sometimes we think in terms of only policy or big framework or even building, permit code level, but it's really the details that you're talking about and the nuances, and then understanding the customers, their psyche, their needs, their levers. It's those things that really makes all the difference in the world. So if you can work with this group of very difficult decision makers, there's a good chance that that others can crack the nut, which in turn collectively, the commercial, the residential, and so forth, will make a difference, and in fact, will actually end up saving more water and electricity.
Absolutely.
So with that, I've been joined by Richard Lamondin, who is the co-founder and CEO of EcoSystems. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you very much, Scott.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.